Hello, my name is Ray Hughes and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project conducted by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. and locally administered here at the Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library at 9th and Main Street, and administered locally by Brian Powers, who is our cameraman today. Today's date is the 15th of January, 2020. And we have the honor and privilege today of interviewing a United States Army veteran, Daniel Anthony Nagle. And it's a pleasure to meet you, sir. And
Good to be here, Greg. Glad to be in this program.
Good, thank you. If you would, Dan, tell us your date of birth and where you were born.
January 23rd, 1933 in Dayton, Ohio.
I see. And your parents' names?
Edwin is my father. He's deceased. My mother is Marjorie. She's deceased also.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Silver.
Who?
Silver.
Silver?
Silver, mm-hmm.
I see. And what did your father do for a living, Dan?
He was a steel salesman, and for many years, was his whole lifetime.
I see. And your mother, was she?
She was a homemaker.
Homemaker. Did you have brothers and sisters?
One sister, who was unfortunately deceased now, yes.
And what was her name?
Her name was Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen?
Mm-hmm.
Did you happen to know your grandparents on both sides when you were a boy growing up?
Just the grandmother. Grandfather died when I was the year I was born. The other grandfather died when my sister was born, unfortunately.
I see. Do you remember your grandparents' names?
Yes. William and Edward.
Nagle?
Yes.
And what about your maternal grandparents?
Dalton.
Huh?
Dalton.
Dalton?
Yes.
I see. What churches did you folks belong to as a boy growing up?
We belong to the Queen of Apostles Parish, which is in Dayton, Ohio. It's at Beaver Creek, and it's affiliated with the Diocese of Cincinnati.
I see, so it's Roman Catholic Church.
Yes, that's correct, Ray.
And what schools did you go to, Dan?
The schools was Corpus Christi Elementary and Chaminade High School, University of Dayton, graduated there from Bachelor of Arts degree, then Georgetown Law School for a year, and finished up the University of Cincinnati. Good place down here.
Yes, yeah. When you were in school, did you play any sports?
In college, the sports, if you call it a sport, would be a rifle team with the University of Dayton, competitive with various colleges around the country.
What type of rifle did you?
This would have been a 22 and a 45 or 45-22, a pistol and well as a rifle. Mm-hmm. The marksman type, 200 feet, 100 feet, that kind of indications.
As a boy growing up, did you have odd jobs or full-time employment anywhere while you were going to school?
Oh yeah. Just like any college student, you have to get summer vacations, and there'd be different kind of jobs that you work to make the money to keep you in school. Even though the school at that time was like $10 a credit hour, that was big money back then. So you learned how to cut grasses at golf courses, paint houses, work in a library, do whatever can to get a job for 3 months, and people will hire you part-time.
I see. And when did you meet your wife?
Met her during high school.
Did you go to the same high school?
No, she went to Julianne High School in Dayton, which is an all-girls school at that time, and I went to Chaminade, which was an all-boys school at that time. You meet at different places where they'd have dance opportunities for both boys and girls to meet.
You remember the first time you met her?
It's probably down one of those places, yes. Yeah, it was called Club Coyote at that time. And you'd meet there on Fridays, and they'd have dances, and that's how you get together.
I see. Very
convenient.
And how long did you go with her? Was she your only girlfriend? Or?
This basically, we dated for several years, and then there was a hiatus there, and then we continued dating after that. I see. That was one of the best moves I ever made.
I see, yeah.
That was 64 years ago.
64 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got married in 56?
Got married in 56, yeah. Yeah.
I see. What was the date of your marriage?
It'd be probably on a Saturday. Once I made it from Germany to get over there, I think it was on a Saturday.
What month and day, though?
That would be June 16th, 1956.
I see. And children?
Yes, we have 3 children, one daughter who is an attorney, and another daughter who is a legal aid, and a son who is retired now at age 52, did very well in all kinds of computer-related products.
I see. And what are their names?
The first one would be Deborah, and the second one would be Lynn. She lives in Atlanta. Deborah lives in Dayton. And the third one, the boy, would be in Tampa.
I see. And
Dan.
And grandchildren?
Yes, we have 2 from daughter Lynn, lives in Atlanta, 2 boys there. We have 2 boys in Tampa, living in Tampa now.
And there's a third child, no children from...
Third child is, unfortunately, has had some severe strokes and is not married.
I see. We show that you were in the United States Army. Being from Dayton, Ohio, you know, that's the birthplace of the Air Force, so to speak. What made you want to join the United States Army?
Well, at the University of Dayton, they had a program called ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps. And I sort of became interested in the military when I was 10 years old, and we were in the war with Germany, of course, and Japan. And at that time, the story goes back where I was involved with, like boys would do, with what was going on, what was happening, and following aircraft, your branch. And I remember distinctly reading about the raid over Schweinfurt as I was 10 years old,
yeah.
in which we created some very bad losses as far as the Air Force was concerned at that time. Eventually that comes back later on in my story. I was stationed at Schweinfurt years later, and that's where I did my military there. But while at the University of Dayton, I became interested in the regimentation, and I became interested in military science. And as I did a lot of things there, like joined various drill groups, joined the rifle club, and learned how to shoot and maintain weapons, care for weapons. Became interested in that, and then decided to go get a commission in the Army, and with that then started the program in which I was in reserve and called up in 1956 because of the problem, the Suez Canal crisis over in Germany at the time. And so that developed more, and the interesting part of being a veteran was the outfit that I was with. That at that time was very instrumental in my life, and as a result of what happened there and what happened later, I am very proud of the service, very proud of being a veteran, very proud of my division that I served in, and very proud of the Veterans Administration that we have today to take care of the veterans. Their motto is, you served us, we serve you now, and they do it very well in Dayton, Ohio.
Mm-hmm. So when you graduated from college, mm-hmm. you had finished your ROTC, you're obligated to serve.
That's correct.
How many?
That's correct. Immediately you are commissioned as an officer, as a second lieutenant, and then you are on reserve until there's a problem that crops up. And a problem at that time I started my education at Georgetown University for 1 year of law, and I expected to finish there and graduate there and then go into the service and do what I had to do, but because of the Suez crisis, they called us up a year later in 1956. And so I was activated. And at that time, I was activated to go to Fort Riley, Kansas, where the 10th Infantry Division was stationed. And they were due to rotate over to Germany as we were finishing up the occupation of Germany after 10 years after the war, to still maintain part of the NATO alliance at that time. The 1st Division, called the Big Red One, was coming back to Fort Riley, and we were taking their place. And the division would stay there about 3 or 4 years, and then they would rotate back again to the United States. Anyway, this was the first time the 10th went over there, and I was a part of the 10th at that time, assigned as a platoon officer, combat platoon officer for the infantry over there in the 86th Infantry Regiment of the 10th Infantry Division. At that time, you have a division made up of 3 regiments, the 86th, 87th, and 88th. And you're online there, and the basic thing is, as NATO versus Russia, is that you provide the defense of the European, of course, of the world for any invasion by Russia into East Germany.
Where are you at?
We were what?
Where were you physically at?
At Schweinfurt, Germany, which goes back to my 10th grade in learning about Schweinfurt, Germany, because at that time, General Eaker of the 8th Air Force decided that the thing we should do is to bomb Germany, and Schweinfurt specifically, because that's where they're making ball bearings. And they figured that if we could destroy the ball bearing industry, we could stop the Germans from rolling, from tanks moving, from cars going. And so in 1943, in August, the first raid on Germany occurred, and that's what I read about in 43 when I was 10 years old about this raid. It was a tragedy because 60 B-17s were shot down, each one carrying 10 men. And we had great losses at that time. We did not have support aircraft to support the B-17s like the B-30, B-8, the B-47, the P-51, the P-38, who had long distance range. Those planes, the planes that they did have, had to turn around in France, and the B-17s were naked then and going to Germany and bombing Germany, and Regensburg at the same time as well, which was the manufacturing site for the Luftwaffe, and that was about 60 kilometers further east of Germany, of Schweinfurt. So all this occurred there, and it sort of wrapped myself around, going back 10 years when I heard about this, to be able to be in that very city that was devastated. And I mean devastated, I mean totally devastated. You talk about rubble and what you see in the bombing of what occurred after World War II in Berlin and all the different Nuremberg and all those places there. It was.
Yes, we're back. We had a slight flaw on the camera, but Dan, if you would, we were talking about Schweinfurt.
Yes.
And all the casualties I think you were talking about.
Very much so.
And the reason for them.
Yes, it was unfortunate, and they tried it a second time, I think a couple months later, and another 60-some planes were shot down, again at a loss of 600 men. Of Air Force folks. And so they decided that this is not the route to go until we get long-range planes like the P-51, the 38, and the 47, where they could have drop tanks and protect the planes coming in and going out. And so that sort of changed the tactics that were involved. Now the other thing about Schweinfurt, as we're talking about that, is interesting, I think, too, because the military tactics back at that time was always 3 up and 1 back, which means 3 squads up, 1 back, 3 platoons up, 1 back, all the way up the line up to regiment and division. And the element of Schweinfurt appears here because the 10th Infantry Division consisted of 3 regiments, which would be the 86th, the 87th, and 88th. The 86th being stationed at Bamberg, or Schaffensburg. Schweinfurt would be the 85th at Schaffensburg, 86th at Schweinfurt, 87th at Bamberg, which would be a line across Germany on the eastern side, bumping up against Czechoslovakia and East Germany. And the idea there is to protect a wall that in case Russia would come down, help out NATO, of course, that you would hit that wall and that would prevent them from coming further into West Germany until you hold them sufficient long where NATO could develop a last line of defense at the Rhine River on the western side of the Rhine River. So it was a delaying action for these units, the 10th, to be there in the event of something would happen. And what happened while I was there. The happening was, number one, having been in the infantry on that line for a year, and you're right across the DMZ like, you could see the fellows that were there, and you have foxholes, and you have the coverage, and you have all the elements of communications, what have you, plus 5 tanks. Each platoon had, at least my platoon, had the responsibility of covering 5 tanks. Again, the military tactics at that time is, if you've seen Save Private Ryan, you see how the Germans, going after Private Ryan's unit in that show, the infantry protected the German tanks that were coming into that village. That's what the infantry must do to protect the tanks, to keep the Germans from using Panzerfaust, which would be bazookas, against tanks. The tanks will then protect the infantry, conversely, to protect the infantry for any machine guns and stuff like that they can take out. So the idea was the infantry officer would protect the tank from fast roads that would develop from East Germany to come into West Germany, and that was the purpose there, and that was that line that was made. That was what the 10th Infantry job was to do over there, and that's what we did do until the end of the war, until things happened. And what things happened were Gamal Abdel Nasser, who I disliked very much, became the president of, or whatever you want to call him, of Egypt in July 26th of 1956. The U.S. and NATO knew something was up, that he wanted to coordinate all of the Mideast into one unit under his control. And he was going to be the big guy. And he, of course, had connections with Russia, who was helping Egypt build the Aswan Dam. They wanted to make another Cuba out of this place, is what they were doing. And that was the Cuba crisis, is as big as the Suez crisis, is as big as the Cuba crisis, because the things that occurred. Number one, I'm over there in Germany. We were going to get married on June 16th of 1956. All of a sudden, the wedding invitations are out. The bridal dresses are gotten. I've got leave to go home from there, to travel home to America to get married, bring my wife back, and it's cut off. I couldn't get done. Everything's frozen because they suspect Russia's going to do something and NASA's going to do something. So I'm trying to get leave to go home. I can't go home to get married. The troops are going out in the field. Nagle, you're not going anywhere. You're going out in the field. They're going up by the Czech border. Forget about getting married. Baloney, fight a little bit. Finally, I was released to go home. And the guy said, get home. You got 3 days to get home, 3 days to get married, 3 days to get the hell back. And so that's what happened. I took my bride back with me. In the meantime, Nasser does become exactly what they thought they were going to do. He took over the posture of being president of Saudi Arabia, whatever it was called back then. And on July 26th, a month after we were married, he did nationalize the Suez Canal. Well, as Britain says this is bad, France said this is bad because they were controlling the Suez Canal when it was built. And they landed forces in the Suez to kick Nasser out. And Israel said, this is a good thing for us because we want to protect ourselves. We're going to be involved in also. So 3 countries became involved in getting involved in the Suez crisis. Russia, in the meantime, sets up to say, wait a minute. I've got Saudi Arabia. I want to help them out. The United States says, Russia, back off. Get out of here. And so Russia did, involuntarily, but they did. And they stepped back. But in the meantime, then, on October 26th, and everything seemed to happen in October or within months, whether the dates are right or not, the Hungarian Revolution occurred. So Russia is bringing tanks into Hungary, which is only about 350 clicks from where we're stationed at. NATO is going beer sack now. What is Russia going to do? Are they going to continue on coming through Czechoslovakia into Germany and over? So it really became hot at that time, and everything was in a boiling mixture. And NATO is totally in alert, a red alert, and the poor guys up on the line were saying, well, dear, what you're going to have to, they're going through, the women are going through emergency evacuation orders to get back to the United States, and we're up there off on the line, up there 20 miles from them. So anyway, things worked out in November to get everything cooled down, and it was all settled in November, so it took 5 months for this thing to go away. But the Cold War was a war. And it was the only war we won that we didn't fire a shot. And it was the only war, it was a war in which we dismantled, through Reagan, dismantled the Soviet Union, in which Gorbachev resigned, and all those satellite communist countries then went back on their own, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, all the rest of them. And a lot was done there, and it also set the pattern for the continental Europe to unite into states, and then we have the European Union out of that too. And so war was averted. And we hope it never occurs, of course. But my 10th Infantry Division, what it did there, I thought was marvelous with the fellows that we were backed by the 100,000 other people that were involved in this Cold War. And I'm very, very proud of what they've done and proud of their history that they did in World War II and what they also did in the Cold War in this particular case here. I'm very proud of being a veteran. Like maybe some of the folks that came back from Vietnam, they come back with a sour taste in their mouth, and maybe so well it should be. And it's unfortunate because they are welcome veterans as well. But much so that something else happened to the 10th when the fellows came back from World War II. And that is, pardon me.
What was the 10th Mountain Division?
What was it?
Yeah.
Where was it?
How did it come about?
Because of the war. It was there before.
World War II, you mean?
Yeah, it really reactivated for that. But it was sitting in there bubbling in the background years before that. But when you don't need like the massive World War II, the massive group of Japanese, the massive group of German, our group, like that. That's how we were not prepared for World War II. They were. And so then they activate an army or a division that may have been utilized in the past in World War I, might have a history there, but not during the intervening period because nobody armed themselves at that time. But the fellows of the 10th who practiced and did Riva Ridge, the fellows that survived, and there was many that didn't, half of the unit was lost during the Italian campaign, came back to the United States, say, we're all skiers, what should we do, what can we do? Hey, let's go out the Vale again and let's start some ski resorts out there. And that's the basis of our ski resorts, Yale and Snowmass and some other ones out there, because of these fellows got together and made a professionalism out of it. Pardon me.
I think you were telling us why they needed fellows and they could ski and things like that nature. And they put out a bulletin or some type of notifications to try to recruit people who could ski from all over the United States and Canada.
Everywhere, the world wide. Norway, Sweden, wherever they get them. Britain, whoever was a skier, get over here. We need you.
And when they initially trained, they were training in Colorado?
That's correct. And there was a site in the mountains where they stayed and they tented. They lived in the snow, and that's what happened.
And the key thing was Riva Ridge?
Riva Ridge.
Yeah.
That was the opening of the mountain chain that gave access to the next ridge, which another regiment took, the next ridge, which another regiment took, that formed the bulwark to where the ridges go down into the water off of them, go down into the Po River. And the Po River is a line also that the Germans would have to cross to come into the Alps. And so the 10th fought not only in the Alpine mountains, but also up to the Po River.
I see. And you were a member of the 10th Division?
That's correct, in 1955, 56, right.
And what was your job in the 10th Division, and what regiment were you with?
With the 86th.
186?
Yeah, 86. And that was Schweinfurt. That would be in the middle. Schaffensburg on the left and Regensburg on the right, with the Bomberg on the right. Pardon me. My job was there, as I said, as an infantry officer. And when we came over there, a regiment consists of about 4,000 men, maybe a few more, maybe up to 5,000 when you have a tank platoon involved and all the equipment and people that they have to be involved with. So they were looking around they did not have a legal officer for the regiment. And at that time, Germany became off of its occupation of 10 years by the troops, and they were allowed to sue GIs. Not under criminal law, that could not be done, but under German civil law. And so they needed a legal officer not only to take care of suits that would be filed by the German courts against GIs, and somebody to represent them, which I could not, so I had to find a German attorney to do this on our behalf, and which was done. And the other thing was to look over any of the disciplinary procedures that had to be taken against any troops that were being disciplined. You had division taking care of general court martials, which is capital punishments to us now, and you had legal officer of regiment taking care of legal stuff, the secondary type suits that would be involved against the GIs. And the legal officer's job is to oversee whether it was done properly and whether the rules were followed properly. And there's some stories about that too, but I'll answer any further questions. Yeah. So after 1 year of law school, they looked around and they couldn't find any other lawyer in there, so they said, Nagle, you had 1 year of law, you're a lawyer, go to it. So in a stroke of a pen, I had 5,000 clients real quick. And it was a pleasure serving them. And I did have 5 attorneys under me, though, as enlisted men. And so we had a lot of help there.
When did you arrive at Schweinfurt?
That would have been October of 1955.
And how long did you stay there?
About a year and a half.
And where did you go from there?
Well, from there, from Schweinfurt, Germany, I rotated back after my time there. The division was going back to Fort Riley, Kansas. And we left as a division from Bremerhaven on a troop ship. And my wife, in the meantime, because of that fine German beer that they make over there, became pregnant. And so she had to go back before me, because if she stayed, I'd be back in Kansas and she'd be back in Germany, which wasn't so good, so she left early and came home.
To where?
To Dayton, Ohio, to give birth to our first child. So I'm on a troop ship, and about 4 or 5 hours out of Bremerhaven, I get a letter or a cable coming in on the troop ship saying that I'm a father. And it takes 10 days at that time for a troop ship to transfer from Germany to United States, which is very slow today, only because it has to go through the English Channel coming back. And as it comes back through the English Channel at that time, there are magnetic mines still in the channel. And so the ship has to wait a day or two to get demagnetized before it can come through the channel to come to the United States. So that deferred me a little bit. It took 10 days for me to get home to New Jersey, to be discharged there to go to Dayton.
Discharged?
Discharged, no, yes, well, discharged from active duty, but 4 more or 5 more years of reserves.
And so what's the date that you're discharged from active duty, roughly?
What did I do after that?
What's the date that you were discharged from active duty?
That would be probably June of, well, it'd be about April of 1956.
April 56?
Yeah, but in that time, yeah.
And those magnetic mines you're talking about, those are left over from World War II?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
As something steel would come over, they'd come up and take the boat out.
Yes.
Yeah, they were still active. In fact, as we speak right now, thousands of people are being killed by mines and weapons. In fact, just recently, they were in Berlin, digging a excavation for a house, and a bomb exploded. That was an unexploded bomb, dropped by the Air Force over there.
We're still finding bodies in the Hurricane Forest over there.
Exactly right. Exactly
remains, not bodies,
exactly
remains.
Right.
So you're now in April of, I think you said April of 56, you're discharged?
Yes.
And you come back to Dayton, Ohio?
Yes.
You've got 1 year law school, if I remember correctly, at Georgetown?
That's right.
So what are you going to do now to make a living?
come to this beautiful city of Cincinnati that we're talking about here, and going to the University of Cincinnati Law School. And
Was that at the YMCA then, or not?
no, by that time we have a baby and a wife, and she supports us by working as a receptionist at the Inn. Masonette Inn.
Oh.
And I worked at the recorder's office, at the county recorder's office, at the deeds area, and then going to law school during the day and doing that in the afternoon at night.
And was that at the University of Cincinnati?
At the University of Cincinnati, while going to the University of Cincinnati. Right, that's correct. And at that time, it was wonderful to my class that graduated in 57 or 59. A fellow, interesting enough, because we came down through Middletown here as we came from Dayton. I was telling my partner here that this fellow had a job when he graduated, and he went to as a corporate attorney for U.S. Steel, and he was making $100 a week. And I thought, my goodness gracious, I'll never make that in my lifetime. Right. And that was big money back then.
Sure.
Yeah. So things have changed. But
where were you and your wife living when you?
In Price Hill.
Remember where?
I could probably find it, but I don't
recall.
That's
all right.
Yeah, that's right off where the bus was, because she came home late at night, and I tried to meet her at the bus to.
Somebody was taking care of your child then?
Yes, that's correct. I was taking care of the baby whenever I could during the day, and then we had somebody, neighbor that was also taking care of her when I couldn't be there.
So you graduated with the law degree in 1959.
That's correct.
And then what happened?
Then I thought, well, I could use some of the points that I have to get a government job as you are discharged. So I applied for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and got a job writing contracts for the Air Force for a year. And this was not really my profession I thought I wanted to follow. And so I looked around a little bit. Being in the right place at the right time sometimes is what you make or break yourself, wherever it might be. It's not what you know, it's who you know sometimes, it looks like. Sure. Well, anyway, a friend called and said we had an opening at a probate court in Montgomery County as a magistrate or a referee, sort of an assistant to a judge. You hear cases, you hear minor cases, and then you can help write briefs and help the judge out make decisions on cases, and you hear cases and adoptions or whatever it might be. So I did that for 3 years, and then thought, well, this is fine, but I would like to still go into the practice of law. And so another friend said, we have an opening, and I started with a partnership there. And then after a while, I said, I think I might like to be on my own, so I did practice on my own for the rest of my 50 years of practicing law, and then I retired.
In Dayton?
In Dayton, that's correct.
And what branch of law did you specialize?
Well, obviously, because I had probate practice, I specialized in estate practice. And then when you're new and starting out, you sort of do a little bit of everything until you find your niche, until you find what you want to do. And fortunately, again, it's not what you know, it's who you know sometimes. And there was an opening to represent one of the big corporations in town. And I had a chance to represent them as not in office, but rather on the outside on a contract basis.
And who was that?
BGM.
General Motors?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I see. Pat, do you have a couple of questions?
Yeah. Dan, let me...
This is Pat Allen, incidentally. Another attorney, friend of Dan.
It goes beyond being another attorney. Pat's a very well thought of gentleman in Ohio and Dayton, and he was past president of the Dayton Bar Association. And he has a good representation.
Very good.
I'm going to take you back to your experiences over in Germany. Afterwards, you had occasion to talk to a fellow who was in the artillery.
Yes.
And tell us about that.
Well, if you think of like an invasion, like in Korea, for example, where you have the Chinese coming through over the Yalu River against the big red one that was over there at that time, and not being spread thin, and you have 200,000 people coming at you. It's very difficult to stop that. And they had to retreat, of course, from the area that they were going back until they could consolidate. But over where we had, behind us were 150, 105 millimeter caliber artillery behind us, and they had our back covered. So it wasn't just us going along by ourselves, but there's a possibility that there could have been other weapons that could have been used more adequately to stop any real powerful invasion that came at us.
But then you have a question of whether they really were back there?
I really didn't know how far they were. Right. I was too far, maybe I was too engrossed in looking to the front rather than looking to the back. But I was glad to hear that later on. This only happened, I only learned about this perhaps 2 years ago, that there was some heavy artillery behind me.
So at the time you were there, you didn't know that you had the artillery?
No, you're right, you're right. You think more forward than you are thinking backwards. You don't want to go backwards.
When you were doing these legal matters over in Germany, can you give us an example of some problem that would arise with German citizenry that you and your interpreter would be involved in?
There'd be like perhaps divorces that would crop up. There would be not paying rent. There would be damages maybe through an accident of some type. Because after the occupation, the Germans are given the right to sue people, just like a democratic type of situation occurring. And they have the right to be represented by the GI who was being sued would have the right to be represented. So I had to find a German attorney that would go out and represent our folks there, and I did find one. And he was very good and did a very good job for us. And that's basically what happened. In another vein, another vein that you would have as a legal officer would be to spread out working with the German people, the Bürgermeister of the town, the Forstmeister of the forest, that when Nagle would have an exercise, and you would be called on an exercise at any time, many times through the month or week or what have you, the balloon would go up where they would go for practice. And immediately 4,000 people are now thrown out into the countryside to dig foxholes, to dig trenches, to do whatever has to be done to make a defense for this projected invasion that would ever happen. And in doing that, you're going through cornfields or rice fields or whatever, not rice fields, you're going through maize or whatever the Germans would be working, or bridges that would be made, and you'd have a 50-ton patent tank going over a 40-ton German bridge, you'd have some damages done there. And so one of the jobs that I had was legal officer to go out and do maneuver damages to find out what kind of damage they're talking about, meet with an interpreter to go with me, to find out where it's located, to take pictures, to write up about it, to send it to the division, say he may have a good claim, may not have a good claim, and let them, the division, make a settlement of it from that point on. So it was getting the facts together, as well as other kind of activities that this officer would have, which I had to have, would be to do different things like manage the enlisted men's duty recreational area, or postal, or income tax, or things like that. So all this would crop up in addition to the other duties that you'd have. One of the other most interesting one would be venereal disease officer. I didn't know a thing about it. I didn't have to do much. I just sent them over to the clinic to say, get taken over there.
Well, how about your German interpreter? Did you get to be friends with him?
Very much so. You're living with him. You're camping out with him. You're in a jeep. You're traveling through all these German little towns and areas and forests, and we carry a trailer and have all the facilities in which we'd set up a tent at night, and we would exchange things. My man, I can remember his name, is Schindel, and he was from Minnesota. He was a chap who immigrated to the United States after the war. He was in the war. In fact, he told me he wouldn't talk much about it, which is fine. But at one time he said he was in the youth corps, and they drafted, the Germans needed people toward the end of the war, and they started drafting kids 16, 15 years old. He was one of them. And he told about the experiences where he was in a very open, in a group where they had these Panzerfaust, these bazookas, and they were shooting down American tanks. And the tank being, I think he said one of the, reminded me of one of the Persian tanks. And he said there was 3 of them that he remembered around the Munich area that he was involved in, which is, you know, that's what happened to him during that time. He wanted to be in the service. He was an enlisted man in the U.S. Army at that time. I think if you were an immigrant and you became an enlistee and served time in the Army, that your immigration procedures would be much easier to get to be a citizen.
Right.
He was very good. He was very good with the German folks that we spoke with. They, of course, had come out with a chip on their shoulder. They'd want to get this damage taken care of, and he'd calm them down a little bit, and so we could make a true evaluation of what the facts were and what we could report.
Do you still keep in touch with him?
No, not him, but the German attorney I do. Very much so.
Attorney?
Yeah, well, yes. We've been over to visit them several times. They sent one of the children over here to visit us, and we're with him. As we speak, I want to go back and see him one more time before we can travel.
What town does he live in?
He lives in Bonn.
Bonn?
And he talked very freely about how capitalism and unionism bind together over in Germany, which, if somebody is listening, might pay attention to how they do it by becoming very engaged in each other. And it's not Wall Street versus Main Street. It's how they get together and how they work things. And he was one of the principals to help devise that, and was working under the Secretary of Labor in the Bonn government at the time.
But when you're over in Germany, I think you were taken around all over the country to different places where the average person wouldn't get to see.
Right.
How did the German people treat you when you would go into these towns?
That's a good question. It's only 10 years after the war, so you might parallel it with how did the South treat the Americans after the Civil War. Certainly there was losses of people there, loss of land, loss of everything that they had, and there would be some repercussions, but you can only see that physically from how they treat you, how they act against you, and or you treat them another way in which they might have the occupation attitude where they serve you very well or something like that, but you didn't want to see that too much. You wanted to see just a normal relationship. And there was this two sides at both extreme ends that you can pick up pretty fast. In the meantime, most of them were very courteous and very, very, very well. It's strange that you asked that, Pat, because when you read about all the atrocities that was committed during the war, by probably both sides, but specifically what we know, what we've seen in Dachau and Berchtesgaden and all the camps that you see over in Germany, that your attitude toward them is sort of different. And I remember when I landed there from a troop ship in Bremerhaven and walking down the street and looking up and saying, 10 years earlier, if I see a German up there, I'd probably be shooting at him. And it was sort of strange to have that attitude. And these people, when you get together with them, by golly, they're as nice as what Ray is. By golly, Pat, you're wonderful. And that's the medium type people that we've met, where we went to some parties for them. One example is perfect, and that is there'd be a group of people that this attorney friend would invite us to a restaurant where they would have a meeting. And there might be 100 people there. And the master of ceremonies would get up and speak, and he'd speak in German, of course. We were the only Americans there. And Montford is his name, would translate it to us. And so the interpreter would talk, he would translate, interpreter would talk, people would start laughing, because the German talked first and told the joke of what was going on, and Monfort would tell us, and then everybody was looking at us to make sure we were laughing too at the same time. So we could see the interplay here was interesting for us. It was very nice. And it's sort of the same way today too, except in Germany and many of the Eastern countries, and many of the European countries now, either their secondary language is English, and you don't have too much of a problem in the big cities. In the smaller cities, you still might have a problem to conversing with people. But sign language does wonders. That's
we
international.
occasionally run into veterans out in towns and stuff, and you can tell that they still had an axe to grind, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. As I went on leave to Frankfurt one time, and the Air Force has Frankfurt on the Main, a big airport there, and I was in a pub, what do you call it, not a pub, a gas house, having a meal, and there was a Air Force chap sitting next to me, and we started talking a little bit, and I said, boy, the church in Cologne is gorgeous. It still survived all that heavy bombing. And I said, Frankfurt is beautiful. The building is up very nice. And I said, have you ever been here before? And he says, yes. When? Well, I was here 20,000 feet above the ground. It didn't look exactly like it is now. And I think I probably contributed to some of this. I'm sorry about that. Yes, I did. That was a lasting memory.
Well, that's all I can think of right now, Ray. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Brian?
Yeah, I was wondering, so you were born and raised in Dayton?
Yeah.
And so you were pretty young when World War II started, but you must have some memories of the war, of World War II.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
So, like in your community, do you remember, like, do you have memories of whether it were rationing or things like that? Particularly since Dayton was like kind of a military town with the Air Force base there.
Certainly.
What kind of childhood memories do you have of
Very much
World War
so.
II?
Very much so. If you had got anything that was aluminum, candy wrappers or something like that, you saved. You'd save bacon grease.
That's right.
You would save coat hanger, wire coat hangers, and there'd be deposits to make to refurbish those. You would have tickets, rationing tickets. You'd be issued a family. For example, my father was a steel salesman, very important job back then to get steel to wherever it's got to be going from the manufacturing, from AK Steel, from USS Steel, wherever it might be, to wherever they're making weapons or things in local in Dayton, which would have GM plants down there making all kinds of parts for the war. And he would be issued more tickets because of gas rationing also. You only had so many tickets for gas rations. So we didn't have much of a problem there. Sugar was bad. You couldn't get sugar too much. All these rationings were in place, and you had to sort of work around that. The big thing for the kids were indoctrination. And because of what we got indoctrinated from, unfortunately or fortunately, or that's the way it was, it's like my indoctrination when I hit Burma-7. In 10 years earlier, I would be shooting this person. To take an old expression, but it's there, it's no good, I have to say it, no good Jap but a dead Jap, something like that. My son, who married the loveliest girl in the world you could say, is half Japanese. And she's beautiful, wonderful person. She's a member of the family, wonderful. But I keep thinking, if I were 10 years earlier there, and her brother was on Okinawa or Iwo Jima, he and I'd have to tangle. And that's what indoctrination that you had back then. And it probably extends even further now that we see indoctrination of races now. You're not born with that, you're indoctrinated in that you see racial situations existing at the present time. And that's where we inherited that back there. Things, you had a car, you didn't get another car. What you had was a 37 Ford, and you had that 37 Ford until 1945, 1946. When they stopped making tanks, they started making Fords again.
Do you remember in your community anybody like Gold Star mothers or Blue Star mothers or anything like people in the windows holding, having any, people that you knew, families that you knew, people who had servicemen that were overseas or any memories?
That's a good point, Brian. I do remember seeing blue stars, which means that somebody's in service, because there'd be a lot. And to be perfectly frank, I cannot recall a gold star. But what I can recall, if of interest is that my father, as one of his things that he volunteered to be a warden for our block. And I remember he would, every week or every month, they would go on a practice, and he'd put on a little helmet and a sandbag, and he'd go out into the, I don't remember where he went, but I remember seeing this though. If there was a raid on Dayton, Ohio, now the Germans didn't have a plane enough to stay over England long enough to bomb them. The Japanese could only do it through aircraft carriers, and they didn't do it, except we did get bombed during the war by the Japanese through aerial bombs and through a submarine shooting in San Diego. But no planes come. But here he is, very much being a good citizen and going through the exercise that he had a sandbag in his thing. So that's what people were all geared up to do.
Did you have anybody in your family that was in the military during World War II?
Yes, I did. I had a uncle-in-law or cousin-in-law who was with the General Patton, the 3rd Armored Division, and he was in the, I think he called it Red Ball Express, and he was a driver of getting gas and equipment to Patton as Patton surged through from Creighton to make the breakout from Normandy. He was one of those drivers there. And interesting enough, when he came back, he had a lot of stories to tell. He wanted to tell them, as contrary to what we hear today, that the GIs don't want to talk too much about their activity. And I am very remiss in saying we never did listen to him enough. We said, oh, another war story, another war story.
Right.
And I just would give another left arm almost to hear what he'd have to say to put that down on what you're doing right now. It would be very, very helpful, because he just had all kinds of things he wanted to talk about. Then I had another uncle that had polio when he was an infant, and that occurred to him throughout the year. He was deferred for a while until about 1942 or 43 when he was inducted in the Army, and with this foot being about 2 inches smaller than the other one, he'd go out on maneuvers and he'd always collapse because he couldn't keep up with everybody else. But he was stationed down in Florida, in a camp down in Florida, but they did go overseas. So those are the 2 chaps that I can recall.
Well, you seem like you were interested in following what was going on in the war. How did you do that? Like that whole thing? Did you read the papers, go to see the newsreels, the theater thing?
Oh yeah, yeah. You say, how was I interested? Oh, every movie television wasn't there, of course. It was movies. In movies, you had 2 features instead of just 1, and you had comedies also before that, and you also had movies of the war going on. That was part of the newsreel, right? And you would have
Cafe News.
That's right, and you would have on the radio. Then you would have Walter Cronkite and the other fellows giving what's going on, and of course the newspaper too is there at that time. Though I don't know whether I read the newspaper that much at all, but you would listen to the radio or watch it on the movies. You'd see when you go to the movies, and you go to the movies maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, something like that, and you get more of this war indoctrination, which is good, I guess, for the time. I mean, how could you be a nice guy? I always wonder about this. How could you be a nice guy and not go over and try to kill somebody, and unless you're indoctrinated to do it? And that's what you learn in boot camp, is how to do things like that.
I was curious of how did you decide to study law or get into law? Was there a story about that?
Do you understand the word predestination? Predestination means you're going to do it whether you like it or not. And I had an uncle that was very, very, very successful in Chicago, and it sounded like a good profession to be in. And so I didn't think of anything else but doing that. And it's not just being in the right place at the right time. It's say I'm going to do that, and so it happened. So it was interesting.
I was curious of when you and your wife got married, and then she came back to you in Germany. Did your housing change? Did you get different kind of housing?
No problem on housing. That was in '56. All right, so there'd be no problem there to come down here and get an apartment at Price Hill. Were this during the war and you lived in Dayton, it would be difficult, very difficult. They built mass homes that still exist in Dayton out by Wright Pat. They just threw them up real quick, and they're there now. Yes, it would have been very difficult at that time.
But what kind of housing did you get when you became a couple, when you brought her back to Germany? What kind of housing did you have in Germany?
Interesting question. As I said, we lived in Schweinfurt. Schweinfurt was bombed considerably by the 8th Air Force. They thought that by going after the civilians, they could stop the war and they wouldn't have to bring the army in. And that was a falsity at that time. Pardon me. So the housing that we had when we went over there, young couple in love, not having any place, didn't think about that kind of stuff. We're going to make it. That's all there is to it. So the first housing was the Officers Club, which I could stay there for a few weeks. And then it branched out where I stayed with a fellow officer that had a job, or had a home, stayed with him. And then through my interpreter, we found this house that was bombed during the war. The house was hit on the side or wherever it was, but anyway, half of the house was exposed. They boarded it up, put a door and a kitchen and a room upstairs, and we had to get up on a ladder to go up to the second floor to get there. But that was our marital room when we got to Germany, and we loved every minute of it. Interesting enough, Christmas time, the season that we're in just left right now, was they decorated very neatly over there, and one of the things they'd put up would be a tree, and they put a tree up and they put candles on it. Well, we'd scream now if you put candles on a tree, and this couple below us, wonderful couple, German couple, would do that, but we would sort of wait up at night until they blew the candle out before we go to bed, make sure everything was okay. But that was the attitude, and it looked very nice, and that was the way that's all they had to do with it. We had no, to heat, Germany is not like Dayton. It's like Nova Scotia on latitude, very cold. And in the wintertime, it's extremely cold, as the boys at the Battle of Bulge found out real quickly. And you didn't have screens on windows in the summertime because there were no flies. You didn't have to have screens. They didn't exist at least at that time. And so our refrigerator was, in the wintertime, would be the shelf out of a window that we'd put our milk on or what have you. And in the summertime, my wife would have to go out on the economy and buy things out on the economy. And there were two kind of money at that time. There would be a script given to the soldiers that they would use on base to go to the PX, and there would be German Deutschmarks that you used to go out in the German area to go out there and supply yourself. So it was a very neat experience. I would not have, there was a quarters for Americans to live there, but you had to be in service at least 2 or 3 years to qualify for those buildings. And they were very nice. But as I didn't qualify for that, we lived on the economy, which we would never change again for all the money in the world. It was such an enormous experience to learn what's going on. Learn the language, learn how people work. They had no idea what corn was for at that time. It was for feeding pigs. It wasn't feeding people. And we had people over for Thanksgiving, we served corn. I don't want to eat pig food. It's not pig food. This is really good stuff to eat. Or turkey. No idea what a turkey was like, this kind of thing. Wine, they knew a lot about. Beer, they knew a lot about. Brochen, their bread. You'll never get brochen any better than you can get bread, buns in Germany. It's just different flour, different something else. Oxen-Swanson soup, oxtail soup. Mm-hmm. It is marvelous. It's stuff like that you get. So the cultures didn't clash.
When you went off to work, what did your wife do? She's like, did she, obviously much of the town when you were at work? And how did she keep herself occupied?
Yeah, I think mostly she probably met with the people around us to do things, whatever had to be done at that time. Some kind of women's groups or going shopping would take a good part of her day to do shopping. You'd have to go to, you don't go to Walmart, you don't go to Kroger's or anything like that. You go to a meat market, then you have to go to a fruit market, then you have to go to a vegetable market, then you have to go to another market, the bread market, to get your food. So you spend a good part of the day doing that for shopping. And reading, we would tape back and forth. We would have a big reel on tape that I would send home, and then they would record stuff at home and send it back to us. That's how we communicated back then. So making clothes, knitting. She bought a nice FAF, P-F-A-F-S, something like that, sewing machine. She got involved in that. So there's a lot of activities she could do during the day.
Did you guys get to travel around to other villages or towns in Germany while she was still there?
Oh yeah, very much so. This German attorney, first of all, every weekend, if I would have a weekend off and not be on duty, he'd have a car come down and say, "Would you like to go someplace?" I said, "I want to see every part of Germany that I can," and he would take us out amongst the villages that you never see or hear about, and see the culture that's involved out there. And then on the other side, we would, as an officer back then, you had privileges. And RHIP is what that means, rank, path, and privileges. And I was able to take a 52 Chevrolet automobile over to Germany at that time. And so I had that available. And so our honeymoon was really spent from driving from Germany down to Italy in the 52 Chevrolet. And gas, of course, you use gas cans that we would have to take care of the car as far as the gas is concerned. She was pregnant at the time, and as we crossed over the Alps through the Brenner Pass, I said, "Marilyn, it's so gorgeous. Look at it out there. Look at it." She said, "Where do I look?" Something like that. So we get down there, and we camped out on the things that we brought down in Italy, and got down to Rome, got down to see Pope Pius XII, actually, personally almost. And we traveled also over to France, and also then went there from there to England, with the time that I had off. Tried to make advantage as much time as I could get. And you were allowed to have so much time, so much off time, just like everybody else on a job, as long as you weren't on an alert. And on an emergency situation, you put in for leave time, and that's what you get. So you could do some traveling. A lot of places we wanted to go to Berlin, and we took a train there to go to Berlin. I had my pass, and unfortunately, they just put in something new that she had to have certain thing done on her passport that wasn't done. So we get on the train and get as far as the East German border. German guard comes through and says, "You can't go any further." So I never did get to Berlin. I still want to go back to Berlin sometime, but I don't think it'll be the same.
Did you see much, was there still a lot of destruction from World War II in places you could
Much
go to?
destruction, yeah, still continue. And in order to repair a road, for example, they put the people to work. They didn't have Booth Brothers or big moving equipment or something like that to repair things. They had to do it by hand. And the big crane that you see now around here doing buildings, I think it comes from the European type of building. And in the different cities, you see these big cranes repairing buildings that are doing reconstruction. But much of it in the rural area is done by hand. In fact, you see a whole city going out, not brick, but stone surface road. They're out there by hand, hammering those stones in, putting those stones back in. Or they're in a file taking debris out of a building that has been destroyed, working on that. In fact, Berlin has a mountain made out of the rubble that was dumped on this particular site right now that's in the middle of Berlin. That's the highest point in that area, made of rubble just from destroyed homes. So there was, interesting enough here too is, I don't know how far I'm going here. Interesting enough too is, after the war, those churches that were bombed hit, were reconstructed. The cross of the church is upside down. And that's how you know how it was blown up at that time. So,
Interesting, yeah.
huh?
That's a little known fact, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, and like I said, the temperature, if you go to church, you freeze. No needles or anything like that, you stand. The German folks are wonderful doing initiative. In fact, where Hitler, Pat and I were talking coming down, doing a little touch and base here, if he would have put the jet plane in that they invented earlier, they would cause tremendous havoc with the B-17s. A plane that can fly 400 or 500 miles an hour compared to 250 to 300 is a big advantage. And the Panzer tanks were marvelous. Their MG-42 machine gun, Lord, love a duck. That machine gun is what absolutely killed the people at Omaha. Absolutely did. I mean, this gun can fire, it's called Hitler's buzzsaw. It can fire thousands of rounds a minute. And as the boys dropped off the boats coming in, the whole area is raked with machine gun fire, fire up to 2 miles. And so they're sitting back on top of these hills. The inventiveness of the Germans are just fantastic. And they were involved in nuclear armament as well.
Oh, certainly.
And they stopped, but they did have heavy water. But that stopped. Got a lot to say for them. They're very good people. It's a beautiful area. The area down around the Alps down there. When we went out for practice with my tanks, we would go to Grafenwehr. Grafenwehr is the eastern side of Germany, and it's where the Panzer divisions practiced during the war. And Wildflecken, I think maybe that's where the Alpine officers of the German army practiced. So we used some of their facilities. Where I was stationed at in Schweinfurt, Kaserne, the Kaserne is what it's called, was where the Luftwaffe for the Schweinfurt area was stationed. And all their buildings were, from the area, you'd think there'd been nothing but a store. They were all camouflaged so perfectly. All these things were done during the war to keep aerial shots from staying at their airplane field down there. They're very inventive, very, very interesting. It was an enormous experience.
Were there anything like like a U.S. show, any kind of entertainment?
U.S. what?
Anything like a USO show or entertainment that would come that the Army provided for you at all?
I don't remember that at all. Like Bob Hope going around doing that, which I'm sure he did, and I know he did. We see that at the museum out at the Wright Pat. We did have a theater, and should I tell them the story about Article 13? Okay. Everybody thinks I'm perfect except my wife, or vice versa. As a combat officer, and because we were so close to the Suez Canal situation, and as the regiment needs ammunition and guns to fight whatever it's going to fight, if it ever fights, there's an ammunition dump, which means all this stuff is collected around and should be guarded very heavily. And during this time, we had to guard very heavy to make sure, because we feel that there could be, like anybody else, there could be people that could come in and do bad things to that dump, blow it up. And so one night I had duty as the officer of the guard to make sure that everything is cool out there in the area. We had maybe 20 fellows out pacing the guard at very particular points. And at this one point, I went out about 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning or wherever it was, I don't recall, but I know there was a warm area that he went to, and that's what happened. He left his guard post fully clothed with all ammunition and guns and stuff like that to prevent anybody from doing anything. And I couldn't find him, but we got the sergeant going here and everybody else to try to find him in this warm place. And I thought it was a theater, I just don't recall, but it wouldn't have been open at that time. And first thing I asked him is, what in the hell are you doing here? Bad move. I should have advised him on his rights under Article like 32 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is 10 years before the Miranda decision. Advising of your rights, okay. So the Army was just miles ahead of the decision, of the Miranda decision that came down, where the police officer has to advise them of the rights. And that's when we heard people saying, you're giving the criminal all the stuff. Well, this is done by the Army beforehand. So when I came to testify, objection, it should have been overruled, and it was overruled. He was convicted by other evidence, but that just goes as an example that some people say military justice is no justice, but military justice was justice. And some people say the Veterans Administration is no good, and the Veterans Administration is excellent. Their motto is, like I said before, you serve, it's time for us to serve you.
Well, why did he tell you he left his post?
Say what, please?
Why did he tell you he left his post?
He was cold. He wanted to get out of there because it was so cold. You don't do that.
Right.
Not at that particular time. Because did I say in that same time that the Hungarian Revolution occurred? Did I mention that in the same period of time?
Yes, you did.
So they had tanks there. They had tanks, like I said, just 350 miles away. So it was an interesting time.
You mentioned then you went to active to reserve. So how long were you in the reserve?
6 years. You're 2.5 years in and 6 years out.
So what were some of the things you did in the reserves?
Not much. Waited for them to call. No, some are active reserves where you go every 2 months or every month you do something, and then 2 weeks or something like that. But you're just sitting back there waiting, and a Korea thing could crop up or a Vietnam thing could crop up, which it did crop up later on, and I could have been called up for that. But maybe because I was married and have a child, or had a second one on the way, or maybe because they changed my MOS, which is how you identify yourself, from 1492, from a combat officer to 8134, or whatever it might be, an adjutant legal officer. They didn't need him. And the reason was, there's a story behind it. As I wanted to continue my education in Georgetown, I couldn't do it because of two things. Number one, I filed an appeal, and the appeal was rejected. And then I said, well, what a lawyer does, the little that I had back then is, well, let's find somebody else different. Is there another area that you appeal? Yes, there is. So I called my senator and I said, I think it was Lausche at the time, I want to go to 2 years. After that, I'll go in and I'll serve as long as you want me to serve, get my education out of the way. Breaking up a 3-year course and trying to go back after the second year would be pretty difficult. So he said, okay, we'll take care of it. So he got me an appointment with the Major General of all reserve officers over at the Pentagon. And I do remember going to the Pentagon. I got lost, as everybody does when they go to the Pentagon for the first time. I remember walking into this place and all kinds of flags and stars and everything else. And this guy stands up, and the first thing he says, Lieutenant Nagle, I don't ever want you to go to the senator again, number one. Number two, I'll see you down at Fort Benning on June 3rd. Get dismissed. Okay, that's my appeal. I'll see you. I went down to Fort Benning. And that was fun. That was not fun, but that was an experience as well.
So with your law career, what did you end up doing? How did post after you were done with your military service? Where did your law service practice?
Yeah.
How did that develop, or where did that go to? What did
It starts off in a general practice. It starts off, well, like I said, I probate court judge for a while, and then I went into private practice. And the private practice was I had a client big enough where I could support myself and do work for them properly at the same time. As well as the law was becoming at that time so specialized, like the medicine is specialized. Like I was telling Pat coming down, you break a finger, you don't go to your shoulder doctor anymore, you go to a finger doctor, or you go to a wrist doctor if you have carpal tunnel problems, or you don't go to the shoulder doctor. So it became specialized, and that's what you sort of gravitate toward. Well, at my time, it came in, the bankruptcy law in 1978 was changed. after about 30, 40 years from the Depression. And new law came in which this bankruptcy law trumped, a small t, not a big T, trumped everything, all the other laws. And it was an exciting time in which to file a divorce, you had to get a bankruptcy judge authority, or to marry, you had to get a bankruptcy judge's authority almost if you were in bankruptcy court. And it was just took over, or personal injuries could be thrown out because of bankruptcy. You could do anything on that. So it became very important. And there was a lot of new law that had to be made into that, and that was part of what I did, as well as representing the corporation and doing estate work. So you sort of restrict yourself.
Are you still practicing now?
No, I gave up after 50 years. And I'm practicing how to make artesian loaf bread. I'm practicing now how to make, how to cook, use an Instant Pot.
Artesian low what? Bread?
Bread, artesian bread.
Oh, okay.
Doing all this kind of stuff. Photography, Photoshop, and giving courses in UDLI, the two senior citizens, of travels that we've done, making Photoshop presentations and legal presentations, whatever I want.
Are you involved in anything with any kind of veterans group or anything?
At the place where we're at right now, I've attended one out there, but I've just been so busy I haven't been able to do anything else. I do really want to get more involved, but it seems like
You can travel
enough
with
time.
Pat every month.
Yeah, doing stuff like this is part of it, right?
Well, Pat comes to our veterans meetings every month.
Well, he should be.
Yeah, you can travel with him.
Yeah, well, we make the time.
Well, that's all my questions. Thank you so much.
All right.
Well,
I have a couple more.
Oh my goodness gracious.
You were born in 33, so Pearl Harbor happens, and you're 8 years old. Where were you when you learned of Pearl Harbor? What did you think?
That's a very good question. Where were we at when John Kennedy was killed? Oh, it was a Sunday morning,
Yeah.
all right? And we were home, probably having brunch, and listening to it over the radio. I'm sure that's weird. Then we just were glued to the radio for the rest of the day to hear what happened in Pearl Harbor, and trying to get the information, whatever information we could get, which was not good information to hear at all,
Yeah.
of course.
Now, when you're in Germany, you're there 10 years after the war is over, and there have been millions of German men killed.
Sure.
Did you notice the shortage of male population when you go on your travels around the country?
Another good question, Pat. I did notice that, but you certainly notice the invalids that are there, and you certainly notice that the people that Montford's, my German attorney's friend, his family had a member who was involved in the fighting on the Russian front, and the trauma that you could see what he went through, post-traumatic problem, very difficult. I didn't really see physical injuries that much at all. I just don't remember recalling anything like that.
You were talking about the bombings. There were 2 failed bombings at Schweinfurt, and then you said when they got long-range fighter support, they were able to bomb some of these factories again. And on the way down to this interview, you and I were talking about how the Germans moved to manufacturing. What can you tell us about that?
Schweinfurt was, as I said, or if I didn't say it, I'll say it again, was the reason why I was selected by General Eaker at the bomb, who was head of the 8th Air Force at the time, was because it was making ball bearings. And if they could, his idea was, and the war plan was, that if you could stop making ball bearings, you'll stop tanks from moving, you'll stop cars moving, you'll stop them dead the tracks. But ball bearings are hard to burn. And equipment, machinery is hard to burn, but the buildings are easy to burn. And he thought that could, I guess, still be the idea here. Well, after the raid, they just picked up those machines and moved them around these various villages surrounding the town. So it became very difficult after that to do it. And in fact, I think the statistics are not like I've heard sometimes that it was devastating. It was not devastating. They were back up in operation, as the German would do through his DNA, would say there's a better way to do this, and they would do it, and they would be up in a matter of months or less in order to continue making the ball bearings. And that, I'm sure there was a curbing there, and I'm not that much of an expert on it, but they came back enough to get enough vehicles together for the Battle of the Bulge to continue this thing for another couple of years.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, it's my turn. I want to thank you so much, Dan, for allowing us to interview you, and I also want to thank you for your service to our country
Thank you
and
very
your
much.
patriotism.
You are a veteran himself, an Air Force veteran here. I thank you for your service. Well done also.
Thank you.
Glad to meet you, sir.
Good to meet you too.